Take a look at this timeline. It covers the last 7,000 years of human history. But right here, about 2,000 years ago, something happened that changed the world forever. The Bible says that Jesus came at the fulfillment of time, and this is when Jesus transformed society by emphasizing the inherent value of every human being, to love your neighbor, to care for the marginalized, and to treat everyone with dignity, laying the foundation for modern human rights. And even today, his teachings continue to offer hope to a world still grappling with injustice. But why then? Why not today, when we have global communication, instant messaging, and social media to spread his message faster than ever? Some people think that he came at the worst possible time.
The best time would be today. To have Jesus come forward today.
But is he right? Because Jesus came at a time of chaos. The Roman Empire ruled with fear, the Jewish people were scattered, and stories of pagan gods rising from the dead were already common, leading many skeptics today to dismiss his resurrection as just another legend. But what if this moment wasn't random, but the perfect time? In the next few minutes, we're going to walk through this narrow window in history, using this timeline to unpack why this wasn't just a good time for Jesus to come, but the one moment in all of history when everything aligned perfectly for him to fulfill his mission and change the world forever. So at first I struggled with the idea of Jesus' death and resurrection being proof that he was God, because by the time that we get here, people already believed in gods like this guy, and this guy, all of whom were said to have died and raised from the dead. Now, I later found out that these parallels weren't at all like the Christian concept of the bodily resurrection, but it still bothered me. And worse, by the time that we get here, cultures had about 15 broad expectations of gods, performing miracles, appearing miraculously, overcoming death, and so on, attributes eventually attributed to Jesus as well. It seemed impossible that his death and resurrection could prove that he was God in a world full of similar myths. But then I realized that the major difference here lied in the origin of these stories. You see, these stories of these gods performing miracles and raising from the dead, they were created to explain the natural cycles of life and death. These myths reflected cultural expectations, but faded over time, leaving little impact. Jesus, however, appeared in a world primed for people believing in gods who conquered death. So was Jesus just another creation of these expectations? Well, at first I felt like this was a massive blow to his uniqueness, but then I realized that this very objection actually shows why Jesus came at the perfect time. In order for the pagans and non-believers to believe that Jesus was God, Jesus needed to meet their expectations. Out of these 15 traits that Wallace points out, earlier deities only fulfilled a few, and Jesus, well, he fulfilled them all. But the most important difference was that these gods were myths, not real people. And Jesus lived, died, and rose again in real human history, witnessed by many. So he didn't just fit into the cultural expectations, he shattered the expectations and then went on to transform the world forever. But none of this would even matter if there was no way to get the message out. The world around this time was chaotic and fractured, making communication incredibly difficult and in some cases nearly impossible. Travel was dangerous, the roads were rough and full of bandits and wild animals. Even in groups, travel was still slow and risky. And with storms and pirates, sea travel wasn't much better. So what takes hours today could take weeks back then, even under the best conditions. And to make matters worse, there wasn't a unified way to communicate, so without a common language, the gospel might have just stayed as a local story. But just before Jesus arrived, the Roman Empire created something unique. It was called the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. This era allowed for safe travel across land and sea, which was crucial for spreading the message of the gospel. Roman roads connected cities, making travel faster and safer, and this is actually where we get the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. And more importantly, the Pax Romana removed barriers between regions, allowing for the safe transfer of ideas. So by this time, Greek had become a common language, allowing the gospel to spread far and wide, and without this combination of peace, roads, and language, the gospel might have remained local. But instead, it quickly traveled across the entire empire. And this was great, but there was still one really big problem. So, as you probably know, Christianity emerged from Judaism, and the prophecies about a coming Messiah were central to those Hebrew scriptures. This meant that unless the Jews were convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, then his message wouldn't have gained any traction. And these weren't merely vague predictions, they offered clear expectations for when and how the Messiah would arrive. For example, the prophet Micah foretold that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, and Isaiah described the suffering servant who would be pierced for our transgression and bear the sins of many, details that perfectly align with Roman crucifixion methods of the time. And one of the most important prophecies comes from Daniel 9, which many Christian scholars believe predicted the arrival of the Messiah to come 483 years after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC. That calculation directly leads to the time of Jesus' life and ministry. And at the time of his birth, the Jewish people were under Roman occupation, which created a really strong desire for a political and spiritual deliverer. So if Jesus had come earlier, this sense of urgency wouldn't have been high, and if he would have come later, then it simply would have been too late, because in 70 AD, the fall of Jerusalem scattered the Jewish people from their homeland and radically changed Jewish life forever. However, this diaspora, this scattering, actually helped Christianity. Jewish communities across the Roman Empire became starting points for missionaries like Paul, who began preaching in the synagogues. This network allowed the gospel message to be spread quickly, not just among the Jews, but also among the Gentiles. So Jesus' birth and ministry couldn't have happened at just any old time. He had to come between 1 AD and 70 AD, a period when both the Jews and the pagans were most receptive and when the conditions allowed for the rapid spread of the gospel message. Okay, but none of this actually matters unless we understand why he came and what that means for you personally. Jesus came to solve a problem that no other religion or belief systems can. Most of us know that if we were to die today and stand before a morally perfect God, we would feel deep shame for the things that we freely chose to do wrong. And this is a problem because in order to live eternally with a morally perfect God, we too would have to be perfect. But we've all fallen short, making more mistakes than we could ever possibly count, and that's the problem that Jesus came to solve. You see, every other religion says, I'm a prophet, come to help you find and reach God. But in Christianity, Jesus says, I'm God, come to find and reach you. He did this by living the perfect life that we couldn't live, and he died the death that we deserved, and he offers us his perfect life as a free and undeserved gift. So that way, when we stand before God, our salvation is judged by the life that he lived rather than the life that we lived. So if Jesus came at the perfect time in history for this, then we can also trust his perfect timing in our lives, even when we don't understand it. And by the way, can you see this right here? I'm not sure if you can see, but that's my endorsement right below Ray Comfort's. And by the way, nobody is paying me to do this endorsement. It's just based on everything that we're talking about today. My endorsement here is very relevant because it's for this book. It's called Person of Interest by my friend J. Warner Wallace, who wrote an entire book on this topic. So if you want to go deeper in all of the things that I wasn't able to get to in this short video, then you can go ahead and pick up a copy of this book down below in the description. I highly recommend it. All right, see you guys next time.